You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Before we set sail, I'd like to remind you, our listeners, to please leave a review on iTunes. We value your thoughts. Today, John Harris and I are going to be talking about medium format imaging and how it fits into the mix of camera gear these days. Joining us is our very own Levi Tenenbaum, Senior Sales Trainer at B&H, and Jeremy Tan, who's one of our Superstore's medium format specialists. Levi and Jeremy not only talk photography, they are also accomplished photographers in their own rights, and they are both fluent in a number of camera systems, including medium format cameras and capture backs. Some of the things we're going to talk about today are what exactly is a medium format camera, what formats does it come in? Like point-and-shoot cameras and a lot of the mirrorless cameras, it's not a fixed size. The sensors, there's about 4 different sizes that I found. Who are the players? Who's making these cameras? How do they differ? And what's the big deal with medium format? Is it just more pixels? Is it higher resolving power? As we're going to find out, it's more than that. We're also going to compare DSLR and mirrorless cameras versus medium format. Which camera systems offer what options and which are better for different needs. And then we're going to talk about the future. Do we need them? Will they be around? Stay tuned. We're going to answer all of these questions. Let's start off with what exactly is a medium format camera? What are the sizes? What are the big differences between them? It's not as wide as DSLRs and mirrorless. It's a narrower genre. So, Levi, you want to tell us a little bit about it?
I'd say it starts off really simply. That medium format comes from the original medium format, which is 2 1/4, or in such range, the square type, which we're all used to from seeing people shoot Hasselblad, Mamiya, and that kind of stuff. And it's the larger than 35 millimeter. And that also back in the day came in different sizes.
That's right. It was you said 6x6 square. It was also 6'7", 6x9, 645. Exactly. So it was never really defined there either. There were choices depending on what your needs were.
Exactly.
What your gear was.
And when the first digital backs came out, which format did they adhere to most closely?
It was actually 2x3. It was a 35 millimeter size. Yeah. It was overkill.
It was 35 millimeter.
It was
size.
actually a 24 by 36 millimeter for a lot of the original backs. There was not much difference.
It wasn't quite what we
No.
call medium format.
Then they started going up. Even nowadays, the most common ones like the 645, the 50C, like the ones that most people know about, are still pretty. They're not full medium format in size.
Right.
The new 100s, and by 100 I mean 100 megapixels. Those are the ones which are the much larger sensor, which is much closer to the true.
I actually wrote down the sizes. The 4 sizes I was able to find is the smallest is 30 by 40 millimeter. Now keep in mind 24 by 36 is a full frame 35. Not much bigger. Then it goes to 32.8 or 32.9 by 43, or what they say 44 millimeter. Then we jump to 36.7 by 49.1 millimeter. And then the largest is a little bit over 40 millimeter by 53.7 millimeter. Not even 645 size.
Yeah, but that's the 100.
That's the 100, yeah.
So that's the first one that's coming really close to the right size.
Right.
And do those numbers break down at all by manufacturer? No, by manufacturer. Like the one stick with one kind, and like for example,
They're actually mixed.
Yeah,
it seems to be mixed.
It's resolution. Yeah.
Okay.
Also, a lot of things with 35 millimeter with, let's say, DSLR mirrorless is that Sony makes a lot of the sensors and a lot of the different manufacturers. How many different companies are involved with medium format? Anybody here know?
There's only a few. Sony has a big market share in the manufacturing industry when it comes to making sensors in general, like the X1D.
Which is the new Hasselblad.
Right, and the Phase 1 100 megapixel, I believe, are both made by Sony.
Well, pretty much Hasselblad, Sony, Mamiya, they're all using, as soon as everyone went to CMOS, they pretty much went, as far as I know, all completely Sony. So they're all using the same chip across the board. So like Jeremy shoots with the 645Z, I'll let him talk about it, but that's a Sony 50 megapixel chip. The Hasselblad, which came out with the H5, I think it was an H5C or an H6C, I forgot which one. I think the H5 came out with it. 50 megapixel, also CMOS, also Sony, Mamiya, 50 megapixel, also phase one. They're all using the same sensor, and what it comes down to at that point is their color science and what their system offers.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the sensors? And you have, originally most medium format were CCD sensors.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing a switch to CMOS. But are some companies still using CCD, and what are the differences?
Yeah, there's the DALS CCDs. Those are still pretty big players.
Yeah, in very niche places. So the reason why medium format started off, and actually almost like all photography
cameras,
started off
right,
in
with
CCD,
CCD,
was because you had great color rendition. So you saw it in video cameras, you saw it in still cameras, you saw it in the backs. And then as CMOS, as the technology got there where we were able to control noise, CMOS was, to my understanding, a much cheaper way of manufacturing. Once we got noise under control and we got the color accuracy to where we wanted it, where it was good enough, almost all 35 millimeter at that point pretty much switched over to CMOS. And then I remember back then, like people were still arguing the CCD versus CMOS for 35 millimeter, but that was kind of a lost cause.
That's a non-issue. I know expense-wise, CCDs require real clean rooms to manufacture. And as somebody I know used to joke around, says, CMOS, they could be built in a Knish factory. It doesn't matter. It's very different conditions.
Exactly.
Knish factory.
So I don't know that I recommend eating your CMOS in a Knish.
No, you're not going to find little potato flakes in the back of your
But you know
camera.
what? I always found it was funny that this is a couple of years ago anyway. The cheapest of the cheapest point and shoots had a CCD sensor, and then the most expensive of the medium format cameras had a CCD sensor, and everything else in the middle was CMOS. I always found that kind of funny.
I remember remarking about that when I was in the kiosks, and we were just like, something here's not making sense.
Right.
It is easier to make, especially with the larger, even full frame 35, to make them using CMOS technology. It's a lot less expensive, a lot less complex.
So are some medium format backs still CCD?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much ever since they went, I want to say 50 came out as full on CMOS, and you'll see the little C at the bottom that everyone's connoting that they're CMOS. But the older ones are CCD. You also find it, I think, in some of like the Sinar cameras. You're still seeing like the CCD chip because it does have great color rendition, and at that point you're not really worried about your ISO range because you're shooting at like a flat 100 or even 64.
That's really for studio use. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine there are a lot of photographers who like that, or they've grown used to that CCD and they like something about it.
The color's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to talk about that maybe a little bit later, but color off of these cameras, aside from the fact that you're shooting in 16-bit color, which is automatically going to give you better color just because that's the color space you're working in, but even just the color rendition on these they're really finely tweaked because they don't have to make as much sacrifices for other things because medium format is not seen as something which I need to take everywhere.
Right.
So they're able to really finely tune it in for very specific needs, which is why they still shine in those arenas.
Now, you mentioned something about color rendition and a lot of the parameter things that people are looking for. When people, I think, a lot of people, they think of medium format, their immediate response is higher resolving power. Now, we have a lot of cameras out in 35 millimeter format that have ridiculous amounts of resolving power. But Lev, you mentioned 16-bit color, and that's something that you don't get from the smaller cameras. And could you anybody
And by
want to
smaller,
elaborate?
you're talking about full frame 35.
Full frame 35,
Yeah,
which in
right,
this case is small format.
Right.
One of you guys, tell us a little bit about 16-bit and why that makes a difference.
Well, the more colors you have in 16-bit, the smoother the transitions are between colors. So you're going to see more color accuracy and more colors within your shades and your tints and your hues. They're just going to look
The
more
transitions
lifelike.
are smoother. Now, also, a full frame 35, the best you get out of that is it's 14-bit.
14-bit.
Now, it sounds a little bit, but 14, 16 is really huge. There's a huge difference. You're talking about several 100,000.
No, you're talking about trillions of extra colors.
Yeah.
I stand corrected.
I mean, between 12 and 14...
It's a huge up. I wrote down a bunch of numbers, but I have some conflicting ones. But the idea is that you're doing 2 to the 8th for 8-bit, which is what we're all used to, 256 levels or shades. Like, so if you're on Photoshop and you see 0 to 255 in your levels, like that's what we're all used to. When you start going to 14 and 16, you're starting to look at, I think 16-bit, I have it at 65,536 shades per pixel per color.
Right. It's an exponential increase.
So it's a ginormous jump. And then just to bring this all into reality, though, 24-bit is considered true color. which is where every color is exactly, you're capturing full color information on every pixel.
And by the way, this is far beyond what our eyes can actually see, but it's there.
We see something in the range of 10 million colors.
Something like that, right? Mm-hmm.
And then there's tremendous arguments for, so why would you even shoot in 14-bit, or why would you shoot in 16-bit? I can't even see it. My monitor can't display it. My printer can't do it. Like there's, and I can make very good arguments for why to do it, even if it's way beyond what your phone can show you on Instagram.
What would that argument be?
Just way more flexibility, like Jeremy was pointing out. Like if I do any kind of editing, if I'm a non-editor and I'm just shooting the world as I see it, there may be room to argue that maybe you don't have to go as extreme. But if you're doing any kind of editing, if you're pushing, pulling, if you're sharpening, if you're doing anything
if you're
at all,
shooting textiles with critical color,
Oh,
now you'll never
absolutely.
be able to reproduce it at the end. But the thing is, starting up front, you'll have as much information as you can possibly have to work with.
particularly things that are red pink.
A big argument for when medium format first started coming out was the pixels themselves are larger, the photo collectors are larger. That means that you have more of a dynamic range, which means that you could see further into the shadows, further into the highlights, and more of everything in between. Now, it used to be about 11 or 12 stops for medium format. Where are we today as far as comparing the best 35 millimeter to the best medium format?
Well, some of the more expensive medium format cameras shoot up to about 15 stops of dynamic range, whereas if you have something like a Nikon 810 or Sony A7R II, you get about 13.9, 14.2.
Which is where
at
medium
best.
format was 15 years ago.
So
now
you
we're
get
getting
an
up to
additional
35.
you get an additional stop of dynamic range, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it really helps when you're pushing and pulling shadows, highlight and shadow recovery.
Wedding shooters could now hold delicate lace in sunlight.
Yeah.
You know, that's a practical application of why you'd need it. If you're a wedding photographer and you're facing this stuff a lot.
Let's talk digital backs a little bit, though. What is out there? What improvements have we seen in the past couple of years, or are manufacturers looking more to put everything inside the camera?
Right. So digital backs, as they came out and as we kind of know them, when they originally came out, they were made to just adapt to your existing medium format. I already have a Hasselblad 503 or I have a MiRZ, whatever it is. And so now what back can I get to fit onto
They
my
were
system?
basically appealing to film shooters because let's face it, everybody was shooting medium format cameras with film, and now all of a sudden we're getting, we could put this digital back on it.
It's not just that. I had a film back. Now all I got to do is put on a digital back.
Right,
And it's the
exactly.
same, and I'm in the same space in my head. There's a lot of limitations to that. There were a lot of issues as far as getting your backs to trigger. I remember being in studios and trying to troubleshoot backs that were not tracing the firing of the lens, and it you have
Lots of
4
cables.
cords sticking out. Yeah, it was
Wake up cables, and you have to turn on the back so it'll wake up and it'll kind of look for the lens to go and then kind of go from there.
Yeah, there are a lot of limitations to this. And then as we're seeing now, I think Hasselblad after the H3 went integrated body, Pentax is doing integrated body, Leica went a whole different route doing like a 35 millimeter. But there's a lot of, by 35 millimeter, I mean 35 millimeter style. It's a medium format camera, but it's a 35 millimeter in style. But everyone's kind of gone more toward integrated bodies where they've completely updated the bodies. You're not using older film bodies. But if someone does have a film body, a lot of the companies out there sell adapter backs to be able to electronically just trigger the camera. You find on tech cameras all the time, Alpas.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
People still using those, and those are ones where you'll find but they've set it up that they can get triggered. So
Well, I think it's
nicer.
interesting. You could even, at least one company, I think 2 companies are making backs that will go to the original Hasselblad system, which has been discontinued for a long time, as well as the Contax 645, which hasn't been around for over a decade easily.
Yeah.
But they're still building technology for people using these cameras. So that's what's kind of neat about it.
So Hasselblad has the CFV,
Yeah.
and that will adapt to most of their H series cameras, as they call them now, and that'll trigger electronically, and it's a 50 megapixel CMOS. So you get what you're getting now.
And can we just kind of give a little rundown on what is available out there for digital backs, and then later on we'll turn back toward cameras.
Sure.
They phase 1 had a bunch of IQ3s. I don't know if they're making them as much as they used to. You probably get them on the used market because these hold on to value really well.
Sure.
But with all technology, as time goes by, prices go down.
Okay, so you have the Phase, you have Hasselblad,
Mamiya made
Mamiya,
some.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so Phase updated to the XF. That was the new thing that came out last year, and brand new body. Hasselblad has the H6, which is their latest one. Mamiya, I'm pretty sure, for a while they were under Phase 1, and now I don't remember if they've been fully integrated into Phase 1.
I think so. Yeah.
But I know that we're still selling their stuff. But I think that they've become full integration. Leica has, and then there's like some random ones like Steinar we mentioned earlier. They're doing stuff like 4x5 and medium format.
Super specialty.
Yeah.
You also have companies like Alpa, which are making the components, the frame components. You have Horseman. We sell, I don't know if we sell a lot of them, but we do sell Horseman components. It basically looks like a frame, and you put a lens on the front, and you put a back on the back, and you basically, it's a modular system. So I think there are still a number of people doing that, depending on what your needs. You could be very flexible. You can be in the studio one day and location the next.
Yeah, I think there'll always be a space for digital backs as far as like to adapt over to 4x5 cameras
and backs have one advantage that you don't have with a fix, and that is that if a new back comes out, new technologies, you just have to replace the back rather than the whole camera. You're not replacing the shutter and everything else that goes along with it. So there's still, I think, a good argument for that.
Most of at least Hasselblad has the buyback programs, right?
Yeah.
Where you send your old digital back and they give you the new one at a
CNR,
discount.
pretty much all of them will do that at some point. They almost have to because that's a big investment.
huge investment. Hasselblad has what's really interesting is after all the earthquakes in Japan, they got delayed on releasing their 100 megapixel back or camera, I should say, with back, and they're doing a really interesting trade up program. If you bought your 50, thinking that you're going to get 100, and I think they're doing like free trade up or something like that. It's really that's really nice of them. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about DSLR and mirrorless versus medium format.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. Send us a tweet at BH Photo Video, #BH Photo Podcast.
We are back. Okay, now let's talk about DSLR and mirrorless cameras versus medium format. Why would somebody want to go to medium format? What's the advantage of it?
Well, typically medium format cameras do have higher resolutions, 150 megapixel backs, 80, 50, 60, 70, even 200 with multi-shot. They have larger pixels, about 28% bigger microns than
Now, just to back up, you said with the multi-shot.
Yeah.
It's a very specific niche. That's a studio photography. That's somebody who's shooting cars, jewelry, something that needs incredible amounts of resolving power to just look outstanding.
And a stationary subject.
In a stationary, good point, in a stationary
Can you
subject.
describe the technology of the multi-shot briefly?
So it takes multiple pictures, 4 of them to be exact, and then composites them into a 200 megapixel file, which I think is a little overkill. Even if you are looking for a superb amount of detail, you're probably going to throw most of that away in post anyway.
And how big are the JPEGs?
I don't think you would shoot JPEGs on that. I'm pretty sure they don't. I'm pretty sure somebody don't even shoot JPEG.
No, they don't. No, but however, the file sizes are ridiculous on that.
No, my medium format camera. By the way, Levy, it's a H4D.
Correction noted.
It's about 70 megabytes.
Okay.
A lot of detail. And by the way, on that note, a Sony A7R II puts out files that are like 120 megs. That's a lot of data too. What's the difference?
Well, the 7R2
is 75, 80 megs.
No, it's 41.3 megabytes a compressed raw, and then 80 megabytes uncompressed.
So 120 you'll see coming from like the Hasselblad 100. You'll see 100 out of Phase 1's XF 100. It's almost like 1-to-1. Almost being the operative term because Nikon will give you a D810 file at 75 megabytes and it's only 36 megapixels.
Now, once you put that up on Instagram, you can see the difference?
Absolutely. Not even a question. I can only shoot
Hashtag MF. Right?
I can only do Instagram because of the square format on Instagram.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have to do it 1:1.
So that's why you had to get
I
medium
can't
format.
crop 35. No one crops me. So I only shoot MF.
No, that's something to really consider because a vast majority of the pictures that people are looking at, and that could be for sales purposes and everything, are looked at on a computer monitor. And if you think about it, you don't need medium format to kill all that stuff. It's really for very specific print output. I was going to say billboards, but you don't even really need something like that for billboards. It's amazing what you can do.
Yeah, no, you definitely don't need it. For
Okay, so
billboards.
who's shooting medium format?
Yeah,
then?
who is shooting? Who's our target audience here?
It depends mostly on the budget, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
When I got my medium format camera, I thought I was going to start a studio, and it's something to offer a client, especially when it comes to the professionalism of having a medium format camera. It's something that you can offer your client, being much higher quality. It sets you apart from other photographers, and it just has a higher end look and feel, slightly better production value.
I'm going to throw something else into the mix. When you're working with a larger format camera, your attitude is also, I think, different.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I know a guy, this goes back a ways, when everybody was using medium format for portraits, he would intentionally, if he had the time, even if the budget wasn't there, he would shoot on an 8x10 camera because it brought a different atmosphere into the workflow. The person sitting in front of the camera had a different attitude because the whole structure, was very different organically.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the same thing with medium format, too. You're not usually going to be, you can hand hold them, but usually it's on a tripod.
No, yeah. Mostly on a tripod. They're just so heavy, and I think if you shoot with a $30,000 camera and people know it, then people take you a lot more seriously.
Mm-hmm.
That's not even knowing that it's $30,000. I just remember working for one of the photographers in LA, and even if we were going to shoot the whole thing on at that time it was like a 1D Mark II. Even if we were going to shoot the whole thing on a 1D Mark II, or let's even say like a 5D Mark III at that time, when we were testing, we would still test with medium format. We'd pull out the Hasselblad, we'd do the whole horse and pony show and bring it all out. And the reason being that his logic was that if a client's paying me $50,000+ to shoot this, I'm not pulling out the same camera they have in their bag right away.
Right.
I want the biggest, most expensive looking camera. So even though they don't know the cost, but in their head they're going, I've never seen that before.
Right.
I'm getting my money's worth.
Exactly.
So a
And
little
they
bit is
are.
the perception level.
Yeah.
But of course, we artists, who choose that format and who may print that size. And when you see, high end jewelry, advertisements, to some degree, fashion sometimes yes, sometimes no, cars, any of that kind of stuff, you're going to assume it's a medium format shooter. You would think. I mean, that's the way I look at it. And you go to the high end magazines and the ads there, usually a medium format.
Going back to what we were saying earlier, which is that you're shooting in a true 16-bit environment. So even if you're going to push it out to my Instagram feed, which of course I will only do on medium format, but if you're pushing it out to even if you're going to push it out to an Instagram feed, or you're going to display it on a monitor on a website, you still have so much color and so much color transition that's there when you're working on the original file. It's going to look different. Now, is it going to look that different? That's really up to the photographer and the client to get it. A lot of people who are shooting medium format are still printing. They are still printing, where they're looking to do like really high compositing and they want the most detail, resolution, and color that they can get. Some of them are doing it just to be different.
There's another thing that you touched upon, but we really never spoke about here, and that is the look of the image. Now, if you've shot with a full-frame camera, 35, and you shot with an APS-C, and you shot with a 4/3 format camera, the same subject, at the same apertures, your pictures are different.
Yeah.
Because the smaller the sensor, the greater the depth of field. When you shoot with a medium format camera, the same thing happens. F8 is not the same thing as the F8 on your 35. There's a look that is so different that you could only accomplish with a larger format.
Yep.
So that's another reason why if somebody's hiring you to do a job and you have a certain look that you're going for.
Yeah, if you want to shoot a portrait at f2 in medium format, it's going to look beautiful.
Alan, your comment about maybe the intangibles to some degree, and the look and the tone. I mean, we interviewed Gregory Heisler, who's a noted portrait photographer who works with Canon full frame, and he works with his medium format, and he goes subject to subject. It really depends on what strikes him in terms of how he's approaching his subject, his person that he's dealing with. And he uses an old back, something that he bought 10, 15 years ago.
Aptus 22 or 28,
exactly,
something like that.
Exactly. So it's not even about resolution. It's just about a tone that he's sensing and feeling. And I guess that's the artistic license that you have. Let's talk a little bit about the disadvantages. I mean, and you mentioned a couple in terms of the speed and the light sensitivity and frame rate, all these things. Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, just going on the frame rate, the fastest medium format can only shoot 2.3 frames per second. So it's not good for sports. Even for fashion, if you have a, fast moving subject, or if your model is jumping around, you might find it a little bit tricky. There's always the mirror lock up to shoot a little faster, but then even then, your focus has to be spot on.
Yeah, but then to counter you, an advantage you have in medium format with many of these cameras is that they have much faster sync speeds with flash.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what the fastest you can do with a 35 is what, about 1/250th?
Yeah. Until you go to
Whereas
high
you can
speed.
go up to an 800th or a 1600th, depending on the camera. That's a big deal, especially if you're shooting someone moving in fashion and you want to stop everything. You want to, the hair's flying back and you want to freeze you can do it with medium format.
And that's because their shutter is not a focal plane shutter. They're using leaf shutters.
Exactly.
In the
The
lens.
lens. Let's talk lenses a little bit then, because that's a whole other aspect. And as Jeremy was saying earlier, it's a price differential also. I mean, if you're going to invest in a system, you got to buy the lenses.
And often that means buying a new shutter with each lens because the lens has a shutter in it in most cases.
Can you guys explain that a little bit then, the difference between the leaf shutter and a focal plane shutter?
So a leaf shutter operates on the principle that there is the blades on the aperture open and close every time you take a photograph, whereas a focal plane shutter has a kind of a curtain that opens and closes on the focal plane of the sensor as you're photographing. So you're going to find that most of the medium formats do have leaf shutters on their lenses. The sensor is exposed most of the time, behind the mirror, but
Essentially, when the leaf shutter opens up, it exposes the entire shutter at the same time. The entire sensor at the same time.
That's right.
Because it's opening. Whereas, as Jeremy was saying, that a regular focal plane shutter is more like a curtain, so it kind of slides across, and it's not open the entire time. It's going to actually be a slit moving across your sensor.
So when you're shooting flash at 1/250th of a second, if the flash sync speed is too fast or too slow, you'll see a black line or kind of a...
It's like almost
missing,
exact, because it's just that part of the frame that was shuttered over.
And with the leaf system, is there what kind of shutter speed range is there? Is it's as fast and as...
So you can't get as fast.
You can't get as
so
fast,
they do top out at I think 1/4000 or whatever, but you can sync up to 1/2000th of a second. So the trade off is okay, I'll shoot a little slower. I'm sorry.
Right. And can we talk a little bit about the focal length?
In medium format, if you're looking for a 50 millimeter and 35 equivalent,
It's 75 to 80 roughly.
about 80 millimeters.
Okay, so about an 80 millimeter medium format lens
Yeah,
is
50.
about a 50.
Yeah, so 40 is going to be your wide angle,
Right.
and then up to 120 for your portrait.
Yeah, 35 millimeters is extreme wide angle. It's like a 21 millimeter, depending on the size of the sensor.
So Alan, right in our shooting range.
That's right.
So what are your limits then in terms of focal length when it comes to medium format? You kind of...
Just more, you're not going to find any real telephoto lenses
Right.
as far as long telephoto, just because due to the size of the sensor, you need a much larger image
Gigantic,
circle. I mean,
right.
you're talking massive lenses.
Right. And to get a nice wide angle, what's the focal length for medium format?
About 35, I think, is as wide as they go right now, right? Which is like a 20, 21
About
millimeter.
20. Okay.
Yeah, I think Hasselblad's saying that they're going to be putting out a 30 millimeter for the X1D, or I don't know if it's on their roadmap or something, or I may have just overheard that. I know that they're starting off with a 40 and a 70, which is going to kind of be your wide and your standard.
That's
Okay,
like
and
a
that's for the
24 millimeter or something around that.
Yeah.
That's for the
Yeah.
new
That's for the new
Hasselblad
X1D.
Mirrorless, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Yeah.
The big limitations with medium format, at least as far as lenses go, is number one, which lenses work on your cameras, because there are a lot of old existing glass which may not work on your cameras without an adapter or something. Like we were talking about before, some of them have to cock, and whether or not they can trigger the camera. The other thing is you just don't have the plethora of lenses that we find in the 35 millimeter range. Like I'm sure it's a manufacturing / popularity thing, but there's so many people manufacturing in 35 millimeter, and there's so many different lenses, and there's so many different applications and tools, and everything from budget lens to high-end lens. You know, we just have a tremendous range, and maybe in some ways might be too much because, you know, people are always confused. Oh, do I get this one or that one? There's 5 different versions of the same lens for the same camera. Whereas in medium format, you're a lot more select, but they come with a higher quality because they need it for medium format, which is actually something I just want to point out. If you make a mistake in 35 millimeter, it's kind of forgiving. So you're not shooting at exactly the right shutter speed for your lens focal length. You have a little bit of shake, but it doesn't translate out as much. We start to see problems with that though when we start to get into the higher resolution, like with the D800 and the D810 and the A7R, and then the A7R2, and now the
very unforgiving.
The 50 DSR, the 5D SR has a brand new mirror system so that it doesn't shake the camera. Medium format is super unforgiving. If anyone knows like anything over there, like the smallest amount of vibration is going to be seen, and that's both due to the higher megapixel and the larger sensor. It's just going to translate it out, and you'll see it much faster.
And none of these cameras have image stabilization, do they? That's not in medium format yet. No. That's strictly a 35 millimeter.
It's called a tripod.
I think the assumption is that you're gonna use a medium format camera with a tripod.
Yeah.
The cameras start at 5.5, 7 pounds after a lens and the batteries and the viewfinder prism combo.
I actually once did a comparison to a Canon 1D something or other, whatever the mark was at the time, with a 24-70 2.8 and a new Hasselblad H4 something with an 80 millimeter. They're within a few ounces of each other, actually.
Yeah, once you have the pro level DSLRs, I think.
So it's really not that, and again, different form factor.
Yeah, the form factor makes a difference.
But the weight was really not much difference.
So much easier to hold a Canon, and that's without doing a lot of knocks. I think Hasselblad has one of the best body types as far as feel goes.
Yes.
The Mamiya and the Phase cameras were much harder to hold. I remember hand holding those in studio, and they were very frustrating.
So should we talk about the Pentax 645Z in this context now that we're there? Because they kind of, a couple of years ago, they brought out this medium format, which, from my understanding, was an attempt to go at the DSLR crowd. And this is before the Canon 50 megapixel came out. So it was like, hey, we're going to give you this kind of resolution. We're going to give you this format, but we're going to do it in, well, of course, it was a CMOS sensor, right? It was one of the first medium formats of the CMOS. But it had the form factor and the familiarity of a DSLR.
And was in the same price range.
And the price range was
as a top DSLR.
Well, it didn't have the form factor. It was still medium format-esque. I shouldn't say I'm not a huge fan. I'm a fan that it's coming in the right price range, in the right space. What it's promising is kind of what it's delivering. I have a lot of issues with it as a shooter. I just think the buttons are too small. I don't like the screen. Let's just compare it for a second. The Hasselblad X1D is now announced. It's a mirrorless camera, which I think is really going to nail what the 645 could have been.
Right.
And that is that it's the right form factor for walking around and going around with. The 645 was considered to be kind of a landscape shooter's dream because it had, if you turned it over, there was another quarter 20 on the side. It was really, it's not really made as a handheld shooter's camera, and because I've taken it out and shot with it, and I actually shot an event with it just to see and just to do it, and it's just not made to do that.
Form factor wise.
Yeah.
It feels like a small box, though.
Yeah.
It feels a little boxy to me. That one in particular, Levy was saying how the Hasselblads they have the best feel out of all of them. The materials just feel, it's just really solid, camera. And I feel like the Pentax just doesn't have that same.
Now, when you're saying Hasselblad, which model are you referring to? The H Series?
H Series,
Okay, just want to qualify
the
that.
3 and the 4.
Yeah, but even back in the day, I remember the H2 was just one of the most comfortable cameras to hold.
Well balanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. They just did it right.
And so despite what you're saying, and those are solid criticisms, is it fair to say that the 645Z reached the potential that it wanted to?
I don't think so.
I think it revitalized interest in medium format. I think a lot of people who have shot full frame have always wanted to go medium format. It's kind of been a career move, going from full frame to medium format. And I think a lot of people were considering or have always considered the idea of shooting medium format. And I think opening up that kind of price door
made the jump easier.
Made it really good. There were a lot of customers at the store who ask about it and want to see it. And I think for them it was a dream that finally became attainable. Whether the camera itself is good is a different story. But I think it kind of told the other companies that are in the running that there still is interest and that they have to be more innovative. Of
course, a year later, the Canon high resolution 50 came out, right?
But I agree with Jeremy in that it definitely revitalized interest, and it's definitely a talking piece. I don't think, and I'm sure Pentax is probably also really happy with its sales, at least as of a couple of years ago or last year, whatever it is. I do think that we're going to see a lot more with the Hasselblad.
And something else that I just dawned on me that we didn't touch upon, and that part of the medium format camera system is the software that comes along with it. And nobody in the 35 millimeter in a DSLR or mirrorless world offers the kind of software you get with a medium format camera. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe Phase.
Well, Phase doesn't make a 35 millimeter, but I would say Nikon being the only one that comes to mind. They make their Nike capture software, which they charge you for, because that's what they do. But they're the only ones who offer a standalone built specifically for our cameras, for our RAW files. No one offers the depth, though, that I think you'll find with focus software.
Yes,
or
that's
Capture
what I'm
One,
getting at. Yeah, I mean, it's extremely sophisticated.
You really actually have to use their software to maximize the capability, because if you put your 16-bit files in Photoshop, you only get 15 out of them and most. So you want to stick to focus. And
well, Focus also, what's unique about Focus, which is Hasselblad software, which is a free download when you buy one of their systems.
Free.
Yep, it's free. It's clunky. It's not the best piece of software that's ever made as far as design wise, because going back to the R&D and yada yada where they're putting their money. But what works very nicely about it is that they have every sensor and every lens tested before it goes out, and they build it into Focus software. So therefore, whatever camera that you take out, the software recognizes that lens, that camera, and says, okay, we need to do these adjustments based on
everything is optimized. It's meant to deliver.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I would figure at $26,000. So.
Yeah, that's part of what you're paying for, though. That's part of it. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the new Hasselblad and the future of medium format.
If you'd like to reach out to us with your questions or comments, email us at podcast@bhphoto.com.
Okay, we are back. Let's talk about the new Hasselblad X1D. I know that for a long time, people who played around medium format would be saying, I wish they came out with something like a Mamiya 7, which, for those of you not familiar, was sort of a rangefinder medium format film camera that was beautifully light. The lenses were sharp as all heck. You can carry the whole system in a shoulder bag, and it was wonderful for all kinds of photography. Why couldn't they build a digital camera like that? Hasselblad just did. Boom. As soon as I saw that camera, the first thing that came to my mind was Mamiya 7. Everybody's dreams have been answered, and it's affordable, too. Let's talk a little bit about that camera. What's so good about it?
I think affordable is relative, right? Because that camera is still $9,000 for the body only and $2,500 for the first lens you get. So that's still an $11,000 purchase.
Yeah, but however, you could spend a lot more money for that same kind of technology.
It's got a lot of megapixels, resolving power's all there. It's mirrorless, so I think the standard problems with mirrorless are going to be in the same X1D. Battery life, electronic viewfinder.
There's an electronic viewfinder on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know if some people will find that an issue. I mean, you're so used to that prism and that viewfinder.
And the bulk and the boxiness and everything else. All the things we were just complaining about, this camera doesn't have.
Well, medium format digital did offer some kind of luxury look to it. And if you go smaller now, are you going to get that same kind of aesthetic shooting wise as you were with your?
You're going to be able to impress your clients. is what you're saying,
Exactly.
yeah.
It still says Hasselblad on the front of it.
Now, do you think that the size and the mirrorless factor will make it more of a camera you can take out in the street with you and shoot, or even
100%.
land? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
gonna be much lighter, much better form factor, much easier for handheld shooting. Couple things to point out about this camera. Number one, it's only contrast focus, which means it's going to be slower. It's going to kind of be that kind of thing that we're
It's
used
gonna
to
hunt a
from
little bit. Yeah.
old school point and shoots. The viewfinder, as Jeremy's pointing out, is an EVF, which for those of you who are not familiar with it, in mirrorless cameras for 35, we're now hitting EVFs which don't black out.
Right.
This is going to black out, and it's going to be slow blackout, and it's going to be slow refresh because again, the technology is just not there yet. This is medium format's first time going into this.
Right.
So all the stuff we saw generations 1, 2, and 3 of mirrorless, Sony, and everybody else.
Fuji.
We're breaking our teeth all over again.
Exactly.
Okay. Are there models available?
They
yet.
had some at our event space for us to play with.
Pre-orders are in. They just pushed back the pre-order to end of August, early September. I know they were trying to get one into my hands, but our rep doesn't yet have his own model.
Okay.
So I couldn't touch it.
With any of the new camera systems, though, there's always the lack of lens options.
Right.
And this will be the same thing. There are only 2 lenses available now.
But Hasselblad has said that they're behind this whole thing. It's not going to be like their solar and lunar and all that other stuff.
Thank
This is real
God.
serious. This is a serious camera that if they went this far, they're going to be taking it further than this. So my guess is another few years we're going to have a full set of lenses.
What about adaptable lenses? I mean,
So right off the bat, they're coming out with an adapter to go to all H lenses. So anything that you can put on an H6, electronically you can put onto here. Aside from, I forget how they call it, but essentially it's their tilt shift adapter. That is not adaptable to this.
okay.
And retains autofocus, the new adapter?
Yeah.
Okay.
None of the old lenses are though. So anything if you're if you're a V Hasselblad V class shooter, which is any of like the old film cameras and analog, none of those are adaptable over yet
Oh no.
because it can't trigger the back.
I see.
Oh look, we're back at all those original issues.
Right.
Yes.
right. So, do you think that the potential customer for this camera will be the mirrorless shooter that wants to take it up to the next level, or is it going to be a Hasselblad shooter who has their lenses and wants to shrink down or just embrace the future? Who's the
I think it's a bit of everyone.
I was just going to say,
personally,
that would be my guess.
It's a bit of everyone. You have your H6 shooter who wants something for location shooting, you know, so backup camera.
Maybe-
Landscape shooters would be, if you have to go hiking, you want to do quote unquote large format. That's your camera.
that's
Yeah.
hiking with it? Well, okay.
Maybe someone with a Leica-esque budget, though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like
they
people who
definitely
need
have to have a higher
luxury
budget.
cameras, just that little bit more quality.
I can see the portrait shooter who really wants to differentiate themselves, and they want to be able to show you something, but they still want a comfortable camera. And we keep saying affordable is within reason, but this is extremely affordable for medium format.
Right.
I can see artists using this. I could see this being used as like a straight up studio camera, as long as you didn't need like tilt shift capability or any of the specific capabilities that an H6 system would give you, and it's less than half the price.
So it sounds to me like somebody, well, of course, getting over like say the first generation hiccups, it sounds to me maybe it's a camera that for someone who wants to go into medium format, they want that quality, but maybe they're not sure where they're going with it. And they want to be able to shoot in the studio, and then they want to be able to take it on the street to do their thing. And maybe it's too early for the traditional experienced Hasselblad shooter to jump on it.
If you've been shooting for a while, I think you have to have come to the realization there's no perfect camera out there yet. The camera that you want to take out in the street is not necessarily the best for the studio, and vice versa. And I think that the new Hasselblad is going to find that same niche. It's going to be a camera that has some very unique qualities as far as image quality, as far as resolving power, as far as the fact that it's light and easy to carry around, and it's probably going to find its own little niche. And I think it'll tap into both the people who now can justify the cost of a top of the line Nikon or Canon system, as well as medium format users who want to have something smaller and lighter, a little bit more agile. It's another little bridge system, for lack of better words.
Yeah, I think for people who want the best, if they want to make that jump above the Canon 5DSR or the D810, your next jump is to go here.
So what?
And
And
you're
now
going to
it's within-
sacrifice optical range. You're not going to have the choice of lenses, and you're going to but your images are going to look different than they would from your Canon or Nikon.
And what is the resolution and the color bit on this?
16,
It's
it
like
should-
16
it should be
bits, 50 megapixel.
Yeah, so
And the ISO range?
25,000. It's ISO 100 to 25,000. I'm 90.
But it's
sure.
very, very clean at 6400.
Yeah.
They're almost
This is a big advantage then.
they're almost noise free.
Noise-free
at
at that.
6400.
Okay.
One thing I really want to point out, because I think this is super interesting, it's Nikon TTL for the flash system.
Okay.
And that is a brilliant choice by Hasselblad, Nikon, or both to do, because
No one touches Nikon for TTL flash.
exactly. And although it's not radio just yet, because they don't have the 10-pin for the radio to the SP5000, it is going to be full Nikon TTL, which is, I think, that is going to open up some really interesting options.
Okay. So we did an episode a few weeks ago, which was the best gear at mid-year, and I think it was a couple days after we recorded that this was announced. And I don't know, was it you, Levi, who said we missed the best announcement of the half year? Would you still say that's the case? I mean, is this the most impressive camera, at least on paper, to have come out this
I think
year?
this is the most interesting thing that's come out this year.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still waiting for Fuji to put out their version of like a rangefinder.
Well, that's another thing, too. All the rumors say that Fuji's going to come out with their version. I think because Hasselblad and Fuji do a lot of work side by side. They have for years.
Yeah, so
The H system is a Fuji design product.
Okay, so that leads us. Let's talk the future. I mean, not just maybe let's make some guesses as to what's next in the medium format from the other manufacturers, but also maybe where we're going to see medium format going in the next 2-3 years.
Well, let's put it this way: the Canon cameras and the Nikon, say the A10 stuff like that, and the the top of the line, Sony, Nikon, and Canon have been really one of the reasons why medium format has not grown as much, because a lot of the reasons people would go to medium format, which is primarily for resolving power, it's kind of hard to argue with some of the cameras out today in the 35 millimeter format.
I guess the options are for medium format is to become higher in their resolution or to shrink down their bodies and become more convenient. Is that there's only two options, really?
Or both.
Or both, yeah.
I think with the X1D, we're going to see a resurgence in medium format. I think it's definitely a much better price point. You know, in this day and age, spending a ton of money on equipment when you can just rent from rental houses is going to be a big thing. It really, a much lower cost to the photographer is going to help them buy more lenses in the future, expand their equipment, and I think the X1D really is starting to open doors for the rest of the medium format market.
Yeah, I mean, what it comes down to is, what are really the markets here? So if I were to break it down, I'd take consumer point and shoot is phones. Our consumer point and shoot market has gone all high end. If you see the cameras that are really coming out over there, they're RX100 or in that arena. Then you have the people who want to go to interchangeable cameras. So at that point, it's either mirrorless or DSLR. Then DSLR for sports. And then what's your next jump from there? Most people don't need to make the next jump. But the next jump would be affordable medium format. But at that point, you've already weeded out. You're at the top of the
98% of the people. Yeah. And so we mentioned Fuji, and we didn't talk a lot about Mamiya. Any thoughts on what they're up to? And
But I think that they got enveloped into phase one completely at this point. So we're not really seeing a ton out of them. For a long time, they had some of the best color on the market from Credo. Credo was the color, and out of Israel, and they just gorgeous color. But they got bought out by Phase One, which is why Phase One's original bodies were the same as the Mamiya.
right.
And yeah, they have a Credo 80.
Right.
It's nice. They have a Credo 50, which is the 50C,
backs, yeah.
which is
Yeah.
the same sensor.
Yeah.
Everyone's using the same sensor because the people who seem to have the money and the time to do the R&D and the research is Sony, because they are 20-something% of the sensor market worldwide.
Right.
So they have extra money to put into really cool sensors.
MMA already has an extensive optical system for these cameras. be it Phase or whatever name is on the camera body itself. The lenses are all
Schneider
there.
or Christian or whatever it's
Yeah,
called.
so they got some great stuff going on. Now the question is, would they invest into something that would be like a mirrorless style camera? That yet to be seen.
I think the next step is, as I said before, with Fuji, because there's a lot of rumors about Sony and Fuji putting out either like a fixed lens mirrorless or a rangefinder mirrorless. I think that would be the next step, because Hasselblad took the kind of through the lens approach with the mirrorless as far as like EVF goes. So that's like SLR style. You see what you're seeing through the lens on an EVF, but I do think the next step would kind of be to go kind of the retro feel. Let's do a rangefinder medium format, either fixed lens or interchangeable.
Well, with the new 100 megapixel Phase 1 that is co-developed with Sony, you might find, Phase 1 might come up with their own mirrorless medium format. I mean, if they keep collaborating with Sony, they could put a body together and Sony could provide the sensors, and could be something for the market to play with.
Yeah, I guess this all begs the question: is when is Sony gonna put out their medium format?
Right. So this goes back to what I was saying. I think Phase 1, as Jeremy's saying, Phase 1 is going to be the one to compete with Hasselblad. So they're going to go medium format EVF. If they do it, they may not. But I think Sony and Fuji, if they get into this, they're not going to directly compete. They're going to do something just different enough, which is what we see Fuji's doing 100% in the APS-C market. They're just doing just different enough. They're doing that retro type feel, or even with their X-T1, it's still retro, and they're using a different sensor. So they're trying to do just different enough. Sony, I don't see them trying to kill their sales with Hasselblad.
Right.
So they're not going to directly compete.
Right.
True. Right. Do you think lens babies ever going to get into the lens market for medium format?
100%.
Okay.
We had the president on. We should have asked him.
That's when you know it's mainstream.
Until then, you could always just smear your lens with Vaseline.
We'll cut that out. For lots of reasons.
No worries.
Something that we didn't touch upon at all, and I'm curious about, with mirrorless and DSLRs, video it became a monster issue. Do you think it's ever going to get that way with medium format, or is that seems to be like overkill? Am I wrong?
I think people don't even want to try. I think they know that medium format digital is for photography.
It comes down to us having this conversation the other day, and I actually remember when video was first coming out, like with the 5D Mark II, and like I remember back then talking even to Phase 1 at that time about going video, and they were like, oh yeah, we're trying to explore the option. The Red camera was just coming out then. We had a conversation with Red, 2 days ago, Friday, I had a conversation with Phase 1 at the time, and I was like, so where is video going with this? Because we see everything's coming 1920, 1080. You guys are not really putting a lot of serious thought into this. And they pretty much said, when you're paying $30,000 for a camera, people expect the video quality to be $30,000 video quality. And when you're at that point, you're competing with Red, you're competing with Arri, you're competing with all these high-end video cameras. We just can't deliver that. And we're not even going to try.
It's not the right tool for the job.
What I will say, though, exactly, it's not the right tool for the job. That's also something very, just in general, always know what the right tool for the job is. But something that is happening is that a lot of medium format lenses are being bought up by companies like Arri or DPs because they need that high resolving power for 8K capture. Arri came out with a medium format 65 millimeter camera. So they're using Hasselblad lenses on that. And so we are seeing medium format lenses being used in video, but the sensor technology in medium format stills doesn't make
the heart of the beast is still a smaller format.
It doesn't make as easy of a jump as we found in 35 millimeter.
Gotcha. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jason Tables. Thank you to our guests, Levi Tenenbaum and Jeremy Tan. Lastly, thank you to our listeners, and remember to leave us a review on iTunes. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in today.